Are you a sad bitch? Me too. I don't mean to be glib about it. Actually, I do, because I think when we're talking about mental health, we should have a sense of levity and humor about it, because if we don't laugh, we will cry. But in all seriousness, if you feel sad, if you feel anxious, if you feel overly stressed, if you're not sleeping, if you have issues with eating or food, the list could go on, and you've never been to therapy before, I want to talk about that for like a little bit, because I think there are so many things wrong with the way that we treat mental health care in this country that if I can give a little bit of information about what it looks like to find a therapist, what it looks like once you're actually going to a therapist, how to find what you're actually looking for in a therapist, then maybe it will help you with the first few steps of getting the support and help that you really deserve. I'm Justin Schumann. I've been sad for many years. I think I'm like an Eeyore type. Like, I definitely have a lot of jubilance and joy in me, but I carry this like beautiful satchel of like very poetic sadness everywhere that I go. It's like the baggage that I cannot put down. I first started going to therapy in 2013. I had this narrative in my head that I was always sick. It was really strange. I think, to be totally honest, it was related to some early dysphoria I was experiencing as like a 21-year-old gay man with no strong role models to look up to and not a lot of education and some trauma, and whatever those years did to me, I think in the back of my head I was always guilting myself for being this thing, which is so fucked now to think of. But I went to therapy because it was literally making me sick. I was telling myself that I was, and then I would get sick. It was like I was making myself ill, and it was just awful. And I was walking around with this anxiety and this stress all the time. So I started going to therapy in 2013. I had a great therapist. I learned so much from him. Now, how I found him was this weird fluke story. My mom, it's a whole thing. I don't totally remember it, but I got very lucky, because there are people who need to date around for therapists when they are first starting. And we're gonna talk about that in a second. But I got very lucky with this first therapist, and I was with him for years. I was semi-regular, which I do recommend, because in my experience, therapy is most helpful when you're not just spending time putting out fires. Because if you only really spend time, if like this is sort of the spectrum of the experiences in your life and your emotions, if you only really spend time here putting out fires, you never really get to have any conversations here where is like more of your baseline and probably what you actually look like most days of your life. Hopefully, we're not always putting out fires. And while that absolutely can be what therapy is for, I find if you go regularly, on the days when there's nothing like emergent to talk about, you can just unpack and unfold and maybe talk about what's going on in your life then, or talk about something that happened when you were a kid, because you're not just fighting fires. So I went semi-regularly. I could have taken my own advice, but I learned a lot over the years from him. I found myself in several different relationships while I was in therapy with him. My family dynamic shifted quite a bit. I was seeing him before my sister passed in 2015 and after, and so that was obviously a significant thing to discuss and unpack, although at the time in 2015, 2016, I did not want to talk about it. It still is not something I love to talk about, and it's actually why I'm back in therapy now, because at 32, 8 years later, it's like time to do some of that harder work that I still don't really want to do. But I learned a lot. For instance, some things that he would share were, he had this saying that I liked called hysterical is historical. And what he meant by that is that when you get frustrated by something, or when something upsets you, or you are in an argument with a partner perhaps, very little about what you're experiencing in that moment is about that thing. That moment is a compendium of all of the minor things that happened before it, because hysterical, to get crazed, is based upon a pattern of events that have happened prior. So if you can sort of, when you get very upset, remember to yourself that maybe this reaction I'm having is disproportionate because the thing that happened is not so large. Am I also upset or feeling angry about other things? It can help you to negotiate that like roller coaster of fury if you realize, okay, wow, I didn't realize so much was lumped into this one moment, because hysterical is historical. Another really nice thing we talked about, I have pretty bad anxiety, but it used to be like much more severe. Spiraling all the time, king of the spiral. My therapist told me that when I felt one coming on, because it really is like a physical sensation, if you've ever experienced it, it's like, it's in your stomach, it's in your head, it could manifest differently for different people, but you like know when it's happening. It is so uncomfortable. But you know you're inside one, and that's the worst part. You can like logically understand, this is terrible, this feels awful, but everything you think of is the worst case scenario. He said, when you know you're inside of a spiral, what if you could step outside of it for a second and tell yourself, nothing you think of in this moment is true. It's all not true. It's not entrenched in fact, it's not based in reality, and almost be able to like name the fact that you're spiraling and almost treat it with humor. Okay, let's see what the brain's gonna do this time. And that was a really easy flip that I then used going forward of like, wow, I just can't rely on anything that I'm thinking right now because I'm currently spiraling. These thoughts are all doused in anxiety, so of course they're maligned and look so much worse than they ever would otherwise. I could go on, I learned a lot from him. Eventually, I kind of felt like I had run my course with him. And I have talked to friends who have had this experience before as well, where after you've been with a therapist for a long time, the benefit there is that they know so much of you. They know so much of your history, they know so many of your stories. There's this shorthand that exists, which is amazing. It's like any relationship. But at the same time, especially if they're not in really continuing education, or maybe they've been practicing for a really long time, you kind of get into this loop, this cycle. Not a rut necessarily, but I really felt like, wow, when I came to you, you were 5 different massive textbooks on psychology and the study of Justin, and now I've like read all the books, and I think it's time for a new perspective. You also might want to find somebody who specializes in something different, or specializes period, right? There's a lot of therapists out there who maybe just do typical run-of-the-mill talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and I say run-of-the-mill, and I don't mean to say it's like so easy anyone could do. I'm just saying that talk therapy is the typical offering. But there are so many other things. DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, which I can't totally explain to you, but I know it's a thing. EMDR, art therapy, music therapy. And then there's obviously even like subspecialties, LGBTQIA+, trauma, sexual abuse, grief. I mean, it goes on. OCD, it goes on and on and on. And I wanted to get back into therapy for a while now. I know how well I respond to it. I know how much I value having somebody that I can just share these things with, who is impartial and objective and outside of me and can help reflect them back at me. And I don't know if you know this, but the mental health care situation in this country is pretty much bullshit. It is so difficult to take care of yourself. It is wild. And I'm lucky. I have insurance. I have means. And so if I can't find somebody, this is what I thought. I was like, how in the hell is anybody who really needs this help supposed to get somebody that can take care of them? So I first went to my primary care physician, who very luckily works with a behavioral care team at the hospital that he's associated with, and I went through their whole process of meeting with somebody and then suggesting a couple of practices. But ultimately, the places that they recommend had months-long waiting lists. And I don't mean like 1 month, I mean multiple months-long waiting lists to even get in. And then if they didn't take your insurance, it would be like $200 to $250 a session. Some had sliding scales, and even if I could go, you know what, I'm very lucky, I'm privileged, I can afford $200 a session, to go weekly? To make an $800 commitment a month to therapy, which is like arguably necessary, but it's such a huge expenditure that I would be constantly weighing my mental health against my budget, that wasn't worth it to me, which is unfortunate because this should just be readily accessible, I would argue. So what ended up happening was I sort of was in a little bit of a rough patch for a while, and then when I was finally feeling good, per my earlier advice, I was like, okay, now is the time, I think. Now is the time to get back into therapy. So I went on ZocDoc, which this video is not associated with them at all, but I went on ZocDoc, which is this website where you can look up doctors, medical professionals in literally any capacity. You want a dermatologist, you want a podiatrist, like you're gonna find them on ZocDoc. And you can search people based on your insurance. So I popped my insurance in there and I just started looking through people. Very few people took the time to like fill out their bio on their profile, and I was like, this is the only place I'm gonna really get to learn about you besides the reviews that clients have left. And so I found this one woman, and she wrote her bio and it was extensive. She'd worked with human trafficking victims, and she's been doing this for over 12 years, and PTSD informed and trauma informed, and I was like, I think she could be my person. So what then happens? Through ZocDoc, for instance, you kind of just book through the platform, and this therapist happens to be associated with a larger collective here in New York City, so they had me download this app, which has been great for communication, and right away I was able to schedule my intake session. Now, an intake session with a therapist is not therapy. Probably. It really does feel pretty perfunctory and going through the motions of like, let me get your medical history, basically. And I knew that. I knew what the first session was gonna be. This is not my first rodeo, but I liked her energy. I liked the way that she spoke to me. I liked that there was a softness about her. I'd also never had a woman therapist before. I knew I would value that angle and that perspective. I also get along really well with ladies. So at the end of the session, she asked if I had any questions, and I said, so when do you think we'll get into a little bit? I knew what today was gonna be, but do you think maybe next time we'll get into a little bit of the conversation? And she said, yes, absolutely, we'll start really chatting next time. And for me with my insurance, it's a copay of $35. You can't beat that, right? So I set up a regular appointment with her on Fridays. I actually have it today in a little over an hour, which I'm looking forward to. And last session was our second session, and we really just started going in. Talked a little bit about what was going on in my life that day, which sort of led to some conversations about things that have happened in my life. And her questions were thoughtful and sparse in the sense that she let me fill the space with a lot of things that I had to say. I love that when a therapist doesn't cut you off, but lets you continue doing some of the work and unfolding for yourself. She asked open-ended questions. For instance, do you find that X, or what would you say about your relationship with food, et cetera, as opposed to like, is your relationship with food helping you, which is a yes or no, kind of, right? It's a closed question. Open questions really do encourage the person to, and this is from coaching as well, my experience with coaching and my education surrounding it, really helps the person to sort of go on their own journey and find some things for themselves, as opposed to the therapist handing them thoughts, like more of a consultant. Which of course I like a therapist that will also reflect things back on me and be like, bitch, did you realize? And I'm like, no, I didn't, wow. But I do like the opportunity to sort of open too. It was good. It was just really nice to chat with her. And now I will also say that I think it takes a little bit of time to establish that relationship, to establish that rapport, but give your therapist a chance. I always said like, look, I'll give it a month and see if we click in, and if I have valuable insights that I walk away from the session with. Ultimately in a therapist, what you're looking for is somebody that you can afford to go to regularly, right? At least once a month, maybe weekly if you're lucky enough. Somebody who specializes in the area that you need, and you can find someone, so don't just settle. And someone with whom you really do click energetically, whatever that means, right? I can tell she and I are not gonna be friends, which is totally fine with me. I don't need to be BFFs with my therapist. In fact, I like that little bit of a divide because I want there to be this objectivity from her side of things. I want there to be ease. I want to feel like I can open vulnerably. I want to feel like I don't have to cover things up with humor. And you will find very quickly, if you give it a moment, a month or so, if this person clicks with you or not, and if you click with them, because ultimately you're dating, you're going on dates. It's tough, right? I went for months and months without a therapist because I couldn't find anyone. And then I realized it was really on me, that if I wasn't the one to make this happen, it wasn't going to for me. So I'm really glad that I found her. I'm excited to see how it continues to morph and evolve. But if you are going through a tough time, I think there's this story that will pop into your head occasionally that is like, you know, this is on you. Same way that I was like, well, I have to figure it out, I have to find somebody. If I want to go to therapy, I have to be the one to do this. There's this other story that plays out where like, well, I got myself in this mess. I'm to blame. Or I shouldn't have to go to therapy to understand my feelings or understand how I tick. I think a lot of this is like rooted in old language. Hopefully your parents haven't instilled any of that in you. But if they have, I'm gonna be the person to say like, but what if it could be so helpful? What if all you really needed this whole time was to put things outside of your head and have somebody who could help you manipulate them so that they look clearer to you, so that you could actually understand more about yourself? Because you do deserve that. You deserve a space to be yourself loudly and have somebody help you put together the pieces of the puzzle. So if you have any questions, I am not a therapist. I never claimed to be one. I am also not super familiar with insurance and how it all works, but if I can help you in any way, drop a comment. Let's chat about it, because I think the more we put mental health conversation and care out into the open, the less stigmatized it becomes, the easier it gets to find that and have more people access the resources that they really need. So I'm Justin Schumann, which I didn't say once this entire video. And if you're new here, welcome. I hope that if you are sad, you're not sad for long, or we could be sad together. Happy to do that with you. And if you have been here for a while, I'm really glad you're sticking around. Feel free to poke around, watch any of my other videos, and in the meantime, like, comment here, subscribe. That way you can stay in the loop. When I post a new video, you'll get notified. And otherwise, I hope you're doing okay. I'm thinking of you, and I'll be back again real soon.